Hello. Hi, how are you?
Hello.
Hi, how are you? Welcome. Yeah, so I guess maybe Jesse will be here, maybe Hussein. So why don't you go ahead and if you have updates, please. I don't know who wants to go first.
I'll give my updates.
Okay.
So, as this week, I tried to work around. My screen is visible, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So this week, I tried to work a bit on the website side, and I tried to look for some other ways by which I can do the GitHub authentication part. I came through various services, like there was one KindAuth, then there was Clerk, Nextstop, Firebase, and I tried out various options. And currently, I'm using Supabase, which is a sort of it's a brand. It's a bit new than the other ones, but I think it fits our use case pretty perfectly. And so, as we can see here, basically, this by enabling this GitHub and adding a bit of code into it, I am able to perform the GitHub authentication. Now, as you had pointed out earlier, that in the future maybe you would want some sort of way by which you can pull out insights from either GitLab, Slack, or Discord. So we have GitLab here. There is Slack, and I think there's Discord as well. Yeah, Discord. So all you have to do is just flip a switch and add a bit of code, and then you can just easily integrate that platform as well into the website. So I think this would be this can be extended pretty easily in the future. And apart from that, this is the I am yet to work on the UI side of it, as the authentication. I was facing a lot of errors, so it took a bit time in getting rid of those. So this is just hello sign in. Once you press sign in, you're being signed in into your GitHub account. So this is coming from my GitHub, my name, my email ID, the profile pic, and then I have these other details as well. And using this ID, I can fetch the repositories of the current user. So when I send a request for that, this is what I get in response. So let's say this is one of the repository I have. So this is its name. It's not private, it's a public one. So the private is false. And then there's a lot of unnecessary information that is there over here. So due to this, it takes a lot of loading time, and it becomes a lot more difficult to parse through all this data. This is the issue that was coming with REST API. So I looked into the GitHub's GraphQL API, and in the GraphQL API, so basically you can just state what all information you need, and it won't give you everything. So for a repository, I just need its name, its issues, that is the issues which are open, so that it can be used as the initial count in the model. I need the total count of the open issues, and one second. So that is all I need. So I can just specify all the information I wish to query, and I'll get exactly only that much information rather than having this boatload of extra information. So I haven't used GraphQL before. I just looked into it right now, and it seems quite efficient. Then I faced a bit of errors, as in how do you get the current users repository, because it was returning a lot of public repositories. So I came across this answer on GitHub, which was answered by, I think, some user on around 2019. So by integrating his suggestions and this code snippet, I was able to pull out all the information. So if we can get, let's say, the current issues and the name of the repository. So if I consider this one, the name is CIR internship. There is two issues open and its link. I think this can be used in the model. So my plan for next week would be trying and integrating this into the website, so that I can have all this data in the website and then improve the UI of the website a bit. And yeah, okay, Superbase I did point out. Apart from that, I also had a chat with Ankit, and I shared with him all the progress that has been made till now. And he seemed pretty happy with it, as it's very close to what he had envisioned how the project would go. So yeah.
Well, that's great. Yeah, it's wonderful. Looks good. Yeah, the authentication. Then you also mentioned that you can actually get like insights data as well, or using the
Hmm.
authentication.
Yeah, so if you want to integrate any other platforms, these are all that are available. So like spending at least, if you spend 15, 20 minutes, any other platform can be integrated as well.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I think this would be better for the long term as well. in case we have a plan to integrate some other platforms.
So they have like all sorts of things. They have Zoom and Apple.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Are
I mean,
those this?
those may not be necessary for us, but
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
having Discord, GitLab, and Slack would be pretty useful.
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. All right, looks like Rochelle said she'll give her updates at the Saturday meeting. I work upon VR project and GitHub LFS and documentation. Okay, that's good. Well, I look forward to seeing your update tomorrow in the meeting. Looks like Jesse is here. Hello, Jesse.
Hey, how are you?
All right, how are you?
Okay.
Good.
It's seasons are turning here, so
Yeah.
things are picking up. But when is the actual deadline for? Oh, sorry, I was distracted by something else. Yeah. Okay. So Rochelle will give updates tomorrow.
Yes.
Yeah. The process. It's exciting to see all that there. As far as myself and my updates, I could wax poetically about some like research and career related stuff. I don't know if you have time for that. I don't know what we really want to talk about the rest of today, but nothing structural or sort of like operational outside of. And I put this in the Slack channel after putting Slannel. That should be the new way we call them, Slack channels. I put the link there, but it's basically it'd be nice to think about questions for We Robots basically next week, like a week from now. It will be happening right now. So it'd be really good to kind of think about questions regarding open source, VR, XR, the way community engagement, all the things we're talking about here. If there's any particular really interesting topics that are on your mind, or if you really want to look at the website and the program, you can see what's there and pick stuff out, because I'll try to talk about it and center that next time, or next week or something like that. But that's pretty much it for. Not really anything on the page yet. There's something because I want to. The current item on the list from last time is basically something related to sort of phenomenology and prosthetics, but it was on a website about the legal issues behind legal and ethical issues behind kind of moving AI in that sort of direction about like prosthetics and sort of the fringe of a lot of mental and cognitive augmentation kind of things as well. So I'm sure that'll come up at We Robot. But yeah, that's sort of my generic update, I suppose. As far as like the lab admin hat stuff, I think we know that we're kind of towards the end of the season, so I don't have a whole lot more to say about that. But if you need help with anything, let us know. And we'll wrap things up, I guess.
Yeah, so why don't you do you were going to talk about that stuff for like 10 minutes, and then maybe we can pull up, are you able to pull up the task board on GitHub for this group? All right, so here's the project board as it stands today. So where do we want to go? So we have a bunch of things that are done in the done column. We have a couple things to review. We have update README VR that's assigned to Vershali, and she says that she's going to update us tomorrow on that. She's been working on the documentation, so I think the README will be part of that, I suppose. Raj has a August update documentation. So have you been working on the documentation, Raj? Is that pretty consistently?
I think that was done. I may have to do some modifications because of the changes I did now, but as of now, it's pretty much done, I guess.
Okay. Well, we can move it over into this column. Then update GSoC website. I think that was Jesse. Are you done with that? I think you're done with that.
Yeah. There may be some other specific things to look over in terms of adding a bunch of the addendums and bonus materials, but the structure of it is there.
Okay. Looks like I think it's Ankit and maybe Raj adding reinforcement learning to open source. That's labeled as a presentation. But do you remember what that was about?
I think it's probably the demo part, if I'm not mistaken.
Is that completed? I think so.
Yeah, demo, I think maybe it was about the OpenAI gym demo, I suppose.
Okay.
Which I'd done, I think, 2 to 3 weeks back.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that one, okay. Then the README for open source sustainability, is that pretty much done?
Yeah, that's pretty much done. I'll update it a bit, but it should be done by this weekend.
Okay. So we have a couple of issues from Vershali. Add organ name and descriptions, add animation, Morris Water Maze, and upload UI and assets to GitHub. So, Vershali, what is your status on those? Are those done or are those in progress still? Or
actually, I tried to upload, but there was limit 100 MB only. So I'm looking for GitHub extension for LSF, LFS, where the storage can be extended. That's why.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's a problem with a lot of large assets, that you have this limit in terms of the file number or the file size that you can use. So, yeah. Well, let me make a note of that here in the issue. So that should be, you're looking for LFS extension.
Yes.
Yeah, even when there's pro GitHub Pros, it's you even have a limited sort of resources there, and when you're using the LFS, so it can be tough.
Yeah, we might think, well, I don't know if we can put them in a different repository, but there, you can use something like Figshare or Zenodo to store the assets and then link to those from GitHub. We can talk about that later, but for large assets like that, it might make more sense to do that.
Yeah, or even thinking of just looking at ways to, constructively document or make on a website or whatever you want to do to show off the thing, or have the README homepage or whatever you want to do, just pointing out where or how you can be contacted for them, etc. There's a bunch of options, even if it doesn't work on GitHub. So that can be something we talk about more later too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll think about it and see what we can do. I think it'll be probably some sort of data repository. And Zenodo actually does a pretty good job of holding assets like that. I mean, they won't be linked directly into the repository, but that's something that can be put in the documentation.
One of the things that I'm just starting to get to know about with UCSD is storing. Sometimes universities can help you store data and files too.
Yeah.
Either on like a personal account or like they just have a lot of more access to storage itself. So that may be a way to kind of bridge off of universities. Especially a lot of them have like open source or open data practices. Like we talked about this a lot at the start of the year, but it was basically, there's a lot of incentive to store and manage data. So looking at what's available to you already might be a good way to start.
Yeah. Yeah, that we'll look into that. Maybe I'll talk about that coming up. Maybe next week or something. I'll look into it, see what we have. Okay, so that's good. Let's see. Maybe I'll make another note here. Storing.
Like if it comes down to it, like, and you really need a place to store your stuff, I might have things to do that through some of what I have available too. But I feel like that should kind of be a not last resort, but like a stopgap measure. Like if it's not working for other things, let me know, and I can see what I can do with that.
Yeah. What's happened in DevoWorm is essentially we've stored a lot of data like that, but it's all over the place because we have like these different solutions for. Some of that is by necessity because it's like different people are generating different data sets, but it's I have a list now of things where things are. They're not VR assets, but actually they're HD5 files and things like that, which are also just as big, if not bigger. So those are things that you can store. You need a lot of storage for, and it's tough when you're in a project where you have to have funding specifically for that because they do charge for if you want to pay for storage, you have to pay for storage, and you have to have a budget to keep that up. So we'll talk about that later. So back to Verschali, you have the Morris Water Maze, add animation, and organ name. Those are all kind of in progress.
Yeah, those all are completed, but
They're all
like
completed?
I am not showing
Okay.
you. Yeah, so tomorrow I will show you in the meeting.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. Okay, so we have to-do backlog. We have Jesse has admin professional development documentation.
That will need more work. It's not yet
Okay.
done.
Would you say it's in progress?
Maybe you could put it in the in the progress section. Might be
like this, yeah.
fair.
There we go. For Raj, project macro open source sustainability.
The
I don't know.
macros are just like big. They're not. You can kind of disregard them because they were just supposed to be issues that collected a bunch of sub issues.
Oh, okay.
So
All right. So yeah,
they're more like administrative.
I see. So
In
project
Gen Hub,
macro.
they might look differently, but for right now, they were just kind
Okay.
of macro issues.
So that's same thing for issue 39 for virtual reality. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
we have final submission to GSoC for Raj and Verschali. Those are kind of to do, but that's in October. And then learning integration, which was also Raj. What is that issue?
Oh, it's the Q-learning integration.
Okay,
Actually, yeah, I am yet to integrate the Q-learning into the MISA model. So I think that can come in progress.
okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Q learning. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I don't think we need a description on it. All right, so that's the board. I just wanted to go through that. We haven't gone through that in a couple weeks, so thanks to everyone who's completed tasks and we've moved some tasks up. So, all right, Jesse, did you want to do your thing?
Yeah. I guess it's basically story time. Story time is basically, I'll try to, I'll do an abridged version and maybe go on some deeper tangents if they seem applicable or people have questions about it. But basically, I've had a lot of discussions with different people lately about grad school. Actually, three different people have recently had discussions or reached out or like, hey, I'm curious about this part of should I do grad school? Because I'm technically starting some things from my own master's program, and it's kind of elicited a bunch of questions about XYZ. There's kind of the old question: should I do a PhD or not? And I don't really know how much that's relevant to people here right now. The short answer to that question for me is somewhat paradoxical, because I think the easiest answer I have is don't do a PhD unless you need to do a PhD. But what does that mean for me? It means I say that as somebody who, like, a potential life goal of mine is like, yes, I want people to really contribute and get accessibility and onboarded to doing research and innovation as much as possible. But a conventional PhD may or may not be the best way to do that. A lot, especially in a lot of computer science related stuff, people get into PhD programs and then drop out. And to different ends, I think that's a huge question and very individualized, but I think it's sort of, I would say don't do it unless you need to do it. But I also feel like the flip side of that coin is I really want people to get to a space where they think doing serious research or contributions to a field matters and is important. So I want to kind of expand the yes, I need to do that aspect of what I'm saying. A PhD may or may not be the best fit for that, but I want to onboard as people as much as possible into wanting to pursue that path. And that's kind of my segue to, I had a really nice discussion yesterday with someone who's finishing a master's program and is intent on pursuing a PhD, but it was a nice sort of conversation about what, and this is a little bit more towards, it's kind of right on the cusp of sort of this group and summer code stuff, because you certainly can have a meaningful career and life and everything else you want to do that's really focused on developing software, developing products, developing things that are sort of ready to be used by a market or a user base. And I think that's that's not the same thing necessarily as wanting to commit to pushing certain research questions forward. And the big question that we had yesterday with the person was essentially, it was a question about how do I find, what does anyone, what does a student or a researcher or a developer, what is the niche they want to have in terms of where in the line of idea or implementation do they want to be? It's not quite science or engineering. You could say that's one of the divides, but do you want to be pushing research forward? Do you want to be pushing concepts forward? Or do you want to be pushing implementation-based stuff forward? Do you want to be, and there's a lot of things along the way in terms of, do you want to be at a more managerial level, or do you want to just kind of be independent contributor to a project, and no, I only want to do the coding. I only want to get really good at this language or this type of coding, and I want that to be my, specialty. That's what I want to hang my hat on in career-wise. So I think that's sort of the general framework for things. And the last sort of round of this discussion, or the last volley I'll have about this before kind of ending my opening monologue about it, is in the case of the recent discussion, the person is sort of trying to find they're trying to find this space of how, until you get to a space in your own sort of like agency, and for lack of better terms, I guess something I'd call like research leadership, a lot of the projects and tasks and deadlines that you're doing are prescribed or set by a teacher, an advisor, a class, a graduation date, right? So you're kind of working, and maybe it's quite similar to Google Summer of Code here, in that you kind of have this, it's the tension between what can this project be, what do I feel like doing for the project, and then what resources, including time, are available that constrain the project scope and development. And with the conversation I had recently, it wasn't about technology development per se, but it was about idea development. It was about concept or contributing to a discipline, and like what level and what intensity and what what is the person's niche or desired role in that process? Because becoming a full professor or running a lab like Bradley does here is one version of that. Being a contributor in a lab, being a manager in a lab is another. Doing things outside of academia, inside of academia, finding the space between industry or public or private sectors, or university or academic. There's all these different sort of approaches, and we broke it down into like, what's the lifestyle you want to have? Like, how do you actually want to spend your time during your day, and what's sustainable to you in terms of living it, doing it? What's the kind of community you need around it? And how much do you care about, how do you want to push an idea forward, versus are you idea agnostic and want to just develop different implementations, whether it's coding or products or what, things that will be put to a market, or things that will be put to an idea market, as if it's not just like consumer, but also like, theory work. I like to call it theory work. So that was sort of the broad set of conversations that are particularly on my mind recently. And I don't know if there's any questions, or if you have any comments, Bradley, or you want to highlight anything, because I can dive into any of those areas, but I don't know if we want to move on or just, reflect on anything.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, the divide between, I guess you could call it ideas versus applied research or work, where, some people, a lot of people have dropped out of computer science PhD programs because they want to start up a company or something, and then that's more like the sort of applied work that you talk about. And, the theory work, of course, is a different skill set. The PhD is supposed to be a research-oriented degree. A master's degree is more of like a mastery degree. I mean, that's at least traditionally how it's been put forth. Yeah. That's like in the typical, like, sort of tradition of the philosophy of science. But then there are other types of PhDs in computer science. They tend to actually have more of an applied bent as well. And especially depending on, what group you're working with, it can be very applied. I mean, some computer science dissertations are largely like, you know, building a tool or something like that. So I mean, you know, there are a lot of differences in that, but I think you know that divide is correct about you know the applied versus the sort of the ideational or the theoretical aspects of things. So you know that's kind of you know I've kind of developed those kind of tracks in the lab here, so people
Yeah.
can take like these sort of I mean we don't talk a lot about data analysis, but a couple years ago we were doing a lot more of that. We also do you know summer of code and things like that, and then we also have like more sort of theoretical or idea driven projects where we do a lot of talking about concepts and pulling them apart. So those are I mean you know I like to I'm a fan of like combining the two, which is you know kind of the way that the academy is set up and the way that a lot of institutions are set up more generally. Those things are separated out. So like you know you have
Yes.
with like tech companies you have these research organization or research arms like you know a Google Research or you know some lab where they have people are doing like they're kind of building the future, which means that they don't test the thing and get like it may not be in code or in a it might be a prototype of something, but it's different than like people working on like at Google working on search, where they have an established
Yeah.
set of research protocols and you just work on building code or something like that. Yeah, I mean it's in like I don't want to make that divide too artificial, but yeah, maybe you could talk about 5 more minutes about like that divide. What your thoughts are on
Yeah. I think the most relevant thing for this group right now is like the divide has a very interesting scaling factor depending on the group and the company you're working with. I wish I could remember. Maybe I can find it. Let me look at my other device to see if it's on here. There's a really funny. Someone was at like some bio. Someone was at a like one of those like you know tech biotech startup things, and there was a particular the really good line from it that I tried to save somewhere. I'll see if I can find it quickly. I don't think I can. It was something along the lines of like you don't necessarily like when you have an idea, ideas make money, but companies do, kind of a thing, in the sense of if you have it like why people drop out of PhD programs or what they help with PhD programs sometimes is well one computer science students are routinely like I don't say poached but like sought out. It's just for huge tech companies like the big ones that we know about it's just talent wars and like giddy assets like just we want to have you as an asset if you have these brand prestige or we know that's part of it yet. But going back to the point about the divide, I would say there's I'll just center on that. What I meant by the scaling part of the divide is the smaller group you're in, and that's including the smallest perhaps being like a sole proprietorship where you just making something on your own, right? But the more you join like a startup, the more hats you're going to wear and the less divide there is in the reality of the day-to-day functioning of that operation. And some people do really well with that, some people do not. Like there's quite a variety of how much leeway and like not all startups are the same and you know all these different niches that people have and the amount of pressure to do one or two or three kinds of jobs, you know, is different than kind of what Bradley was saying, where it's like you have a research arm and you have a really established, you know, let's improve Google search, you know, Like that's a very divided, segmented approach to it. And I don't know. There's necessarily, I don't see it as like this is one kind of person, and what you want to do may change over the point of your career depending on experience or interest or whatever. But it's just something to keep in mind. Like there's sort of like, I would say, I guess my concluding thought about this, and we'll kind of dovetail to the bigger picture and other things I mentioned earlier, is there's sort of like a macro priority that I think is super, like there's sort of the divide about theory and applied stuff, yes. And maybe it's as simple as that, but I'd say like there's a huge divide in terms of like how, I guess I'll put it this way, speaking from a research perspective, which maybe isn't what people here want to do necessarily or what this group is about. From a purely research, doing a lot of theory or idea work perspective, and why I said don't do a PhD unless you quote unquote need to, is I think for each of these paths, there's a certain toll or sustainability requirement that you have to enjoy doing whatever the grunt work is about it. And what that looks like for the pushing, like really pushing an idea forward in the theory and the inertia of different paradigms forward in a field of study, which is maybe more, less applied, I'll put it that way. That requires a certain, you have to really enjoy part of that. Otherwise, no matter all the other, like I feel like all the other motivations for getting a PhD or doing work in that space will eventually tap out. Like if you don't actually enjoy doing some of the hard work about the ideas and the theory, then it's going to be challenging to sustain it. And I feel like, I'm not saying that as like, oh, you're going to be tough, but much more like, I think I come from the perspective of I'm less interested in trying to mold people into being a certain outcome and more interested in maximizing whatever the potential for what that person is. So I think there's a time for like very important reflection and getting experience and having mentors who can guide you through, hey, is this a good fit for you? Or is this more something that's like, you kind of have to requisitely struggle in the space for a while to really know what's comfortable for you or not in that space. And I will conclude by saying, I feel really fortunate for Bradley and the lab here because I kind of had this very, I've had a really nice experience over the last few years of being able to, with an advisor and people that care about a topic, struggle like and deal with some of the harder aspects of theory work in like interdisciplinary challenging ways. And I feel like that's been really, that kind of experience and insight is something that only comes through enough time in a space where you're allowed to deal with the challenges you want to deal with. So like if there's an advice I would give, it's like try to get as much time and space in the environment that's allowing you to look at the problems you want to look at, whether they're theory or not, because until you have that time and that context, it's hard to really know. And then once you get it, it does make a lot of other choices easier. So that's my concluding soapbox for this today.
Oh yeah, that's great. That's great. And yeah, it's definitely like, that interdisciplinary work that you're talking about. It's often it's very hard to get, a set of questions and, because you're integrating all these different areas and sometimes they don't match together well. So you have to find your own way. And then not a lot of people have asked the kinds of questions you want to ask, for example.
There's something I want to articulate, and I don't know how to do it, and maybe it'll be something for me to try to write up, and because the person I was talking to yesterday mentioned this too. It's sort of like, are you working in a situation where the conclusion and the means by which of doing it the method are kind of set and you're just optimizing within static conditions relatively? Or are you, software technology is kind of inherently changing, but that's also different than theories and paradigms of an idea or a concept. And kind of like, what is the difference between those, and where, almost like just literacy about what that is. I feel like that's really important, and we don't really train people to deal with that very well. It's kind of just this, oh, you'll get experience, but it's like, I feel like there'd be a much better way to explain some of those factors. But that's, for future discussion.
Yeah, I think theory, though, is constantly changing in the sense you have to keep up with the literature. And that's the one trap people fall into, is that they stagnate and then they kind of keep making the same argument for 20 years or something. And the same holds true for like coding, I mean, some people are out on the frontier with new languages and some people stick to the old standbys. So, for example, we might use Python, but we might also use Kotlin. You might have different languages that you use for different things. So it's like, there's always that innovation versus sort of, and I don't want to say that stagnation is always bad or being sort of constant is always bad. It's just that it's a different style of work, and you can get things out of those different styles of work, just depending on how you approach things. So yeah, All right. Well, thank you, Jesse. It was very good. Thank you. So I want to talk about a few things in the last 15 minutes. I want to start profiling some of the open source repositories that we have in the org. I think we have a lot of stuff that, we kind of sits in GitHub and no one really does anything with it. And I don't mean that anyone here necessarily needs to work with these things, but I want to make them more sort of people aware of what's in our sort of what's kind of sitting there. And then I also want to talk about building like a good submission for GSoC and what some of our students in the past have done for that. So let me share my screen. All right, so the first thing is that when you're submitting your projects, you're going to have one GitHub repository where you have all of your assets and your code and everything, and then that's going to be in these subdirectories, and then you'll have a README file, which is here, and this is one way to do this. This is from Himanshu's submission last year. So Himanshu worked on the open source sustainability project. We actually had 3 people working on that. So if you go to GSoC open source ethics, you'll find, and I know it's a weird name, that used to be the working name for this. But there are 3 projects: ethical regulators, collective cognition reinforcement learning, and collective cognition AI ethics. So these are 3. I think the first one was Brian. The second one was Himanshu, and the third one was Hussein. So we had 3 people working on them, and they all have different. Well, they all kind of use the same model for submitting their work. So Hussein, put together this set of files. He has a bunch of markdown files here where he's making notes, because a lot of his work was actually more sort of that theoretical based work, in addition to coding. Whereas what Himanshu did was largely coding, but some theoretical work, and then Brian did kind of a mix, a little bit more towards the theoretical. So, but the point here is that you have files in your GitHub repository. You want to have it, make sure that it's stable over time. So, if you're doing this on your, I did provide some repositories for you at the beginning of GSoC, and that is for 2020. So it's under GSoC 2023, and of course we have open source sustainability and virtual reality for research. So we have these already. So this is where we should put the final submissions, and then we can submit it from there. Because what tends to happen is, we have all these repositories and we want to keep them for future years. So we want to keep them stable for future years. GitHub allows you to keep them stable, but you have to remember where they are. And, a good way to do that is to have it hosted by the org. So that's why I want people to do this. Again, we can do this by just uploading the files here, or, we can figure out another way to do it. But I really want to keep them in this kind of order. So Himanshu, I'm going to go back to Himanshu's example. No. So this is it here. So Himanshu built this README file which has all of these details about the project. So he kind of describes the project. Actually, this is reinforcement learning. So he describes the project. He does some diagrams that show the basics of reinforcement learning. So I don't know for Raj, maybe, I don't know if you want to reuse some of these figures or draw your own, but it might be useful to link these two things together too later. We don't need to do that for the submission, but we can do that later. So Himanshu, he has his code in these assets and SRC directories, and then the README file which goes through project description, summary of work done. That's always important because the GSoC people want to see what you've done and kind of enumerating it in a way that like they can take in. And, they can also, if you have links to things, you can provide them. Really what they're going to do is you're going to submit the link to wherever this is hosted. So this would be Himanshu's submission link and in this directory, and then they would take that, they would open it up, and they have to be able to run the software in order to, or at least get a sense of what was done. So I'm not really sure. I think with Rishali's assets, I think we'll link to the assets maybe in the README for the final submission. So when you say summary of work done, you talk about the work, and then if you have assets you want to link to, you can put those links in this document, and then the links,
Actually, I can upload it on Google Drive and give access publicly if they want to look at the assets, and post it on a README file if that's possible.
Yeah, as long as we have with Google Docs, you do have the permissions. You have to make sure that those are public. So that's important. But we'll think about how to host these, and the point being is wherever it's hosted, we'll have the link, and people can access it. So that's the first part, is the summary of work done. Then he talks about his NetLogo environment, which is what he was working on. For Raj, it would be the maybe the process of mapping this to Mesa, and then some of the authentication work he's been doing, and some of the other work with the website. So that would be kind of like listing those things out, like breaking it down into, this is agent-based model environment, this is the other thing. With Rishali, it would just basically be, your work with building assets, building environments, and just breaking that out so that people can see what you did. Screenshots are good and diagrams are good. I don't want to make you spend a lot of time on making diagrams and things, but they're always good. And so he laid out the Q-learning algorithm in here. This is not just going to be for the GSoC submission, but this is also going to be for our future, students, people who want to work with this repository, so they can get a sense of what was done, what's in there, and some of the technical details. And then he put future scope. So some of these things we've talked about, I think we're actually getting this list knocked off this summer. So that's good. And, but I want both of you to think about the future scope. What are the future steps that need to be taken? Like I said, you're stopping your project at a certain point. You could go on forever, but you want to stop at a certain point and just present what you have it in the repository. And then if people want to come later, including yourself, and contribute to that repository, what are the future points? What are the things that we can turn into issues for future contributors or future work. And then, some sort of acknowledgement or conclusion. So that's what you need to do for a submission. It doesn't need to be super fancy, but it needs to be like complete to some extent. And then we need to have like an accounting of what's in the repository, what kinds of things that we need to do to run the software, what are the limitations. Think about like, what needs to be done in the future. So like some of the limitations of some of the approaches you've taken, you've made trade-offs during this summer. What were those trade-offs? And, is it something that maybe we can do in the future to improve it? So for Himanshu, it was he had to use NetLogo, or he used NetLogo. There's a trade-off there of, control and being able to host that on a web server. You can do NetLogo hosting on a web server, but it's not the best solution you could pick, right? So, but the ease of NetLogo is that you had these models that were predefined and you could just pick up and use those. So there are a lot of trade-offs that we make in our projects, and so I want you to talk a little bit about that as well. Okay, so the second thing I want to talk about before we go. Is this is one of our open source repositories. This work, of course, Jesse is familiar with it. This was something we did over the summer of 2019. So it's been a while since we worked on it. And this is called Developmental Reitenberg Vehicles. And so we've published actually a paper and a preprint on this. And this is really the product of, a working group that we had that summer where we worked on adversarial approaches to these developmental Reitenberg vehicles. So this repository has some information about the study group. It has listings to our papers. Didn't really put a lot of information about the actual vehicles because those are in these directories, which are BroadGenBrain and MultiLearn. So BroadGenBrain is something that was developed by Stefan Voretsky, and he worked on this project where he built these developmental Reitenberg vehicles from, he built a genetic algorithm to sort of develop brains for them. So the inside of a Reitenberg vehicle generally doesn't have a brain in it. It's just this little vehicle that has a minimal wiring inside, and it behaves kind of in accordance with, different stimuli. Now, he developed this method where he developed these brains that were, these sort of neural networks that were of moderate size. Maybe they were 5 to 20 units, and they were all connected together. And you could, he basically built a simulation, which is downloadable here. It's a jar file. And you run the simulation and you put the vehicles in an environment. You can define the size of the brain. You can define the size of the vehicle. And it will, you can do the simulation. So it's like I guess it's an agent-based simulation. And it runs, and you can compare different conditions and things like that. So that's interesting. MultiLearn is a different approach. It doesn't use a genetic algorithm, and it doesn't use a sort of a variable size network. It actually uses multi-sensory integration. So this is the file here. You have the simulation in a .c file, and this talks a little bit about some of the aspects of. So this was Z.E. Gong, who is actually now at Duke Neuroscience. He's a graduate student, and he developed this platform where, he kind of goes through the Reitenberg vehicle, this developmental Reitenberg vehicle, where the vehicle has to learn about different types of stimuli. So they might learn, the taste of something in the environment, the smell of something, or some light stimulus or something like that, and then the developmental part is the ability for them to integrate those signals. And so you can learn a lot about like the environment by integrating different signals in space and time. And so he generated all these gradients, environmental gradients, put the vehicles in there, and they were able to learn, different aspects of the environment by integrating, stimuli. And so this is based on a Lee Hopefield network. So the internal network is invariant, but the learning capabilities change. So the weights change of this network. So he uses a generalized Hebbian algorithm for this. We have, these are the environmental gradients. So we have two different approaches, and there was a third approach which is not in this repository because the person working on it is actively working on it elsewhere. So this is our repository. We also have two papers. So the first one is this paper in the journal Artificial Life. This talks about Reitenberg vehicles as developmental neurosimulation. So it introduces us to three models, two of those being Broadgen brain and multi-learn, and then there's a third model of collective behavior, and then it talks about this developmental neurosimulation paradigm. The other paper is a preprint that I'm actually in the works of producing a significant revision to. This is talking about embodied continual learning. So this is introducing developmental Reitenberg vehicles in a little bit different paradigm. And so this is going to be coming out soon. But I think the point here is that there's code to work on. A lot of these things have different issues associated with them. So for the developmental Reitenberg vehicles repository, the project board is under projects, and it's called open source development. If you go to the projects board, it's under projects classic. And so you can go to that board, and you see we have a couple of issues to do. So these are largely things that need to be debugged from the original version of the software. This is, of course, this was sort of when the project was made. It was these sorts of things were put in to sort of save time, or they weren't really in reach. So these are things that people can work on as sort of immediate issues, and then later on we'll be creating new issues for things once you get started with it. In any case, when people start working on it again, we'll have issues that people will want to post. So this is something that I'm looking forward to kind of getting back into with new, fresh perspectives. We'll be putting more stuff up here as it comes along. We have some work on different types of epigenetic switches for behavior and development. So that sort of stuff will be put up there as well when that gets done. So that's going to be something that people can contribute to. They can look around. The way to do open source contribution to an existing repository is to look through the repository, see where your interests match what people are doing, and ask questions about it, and maybe make an issue, maybe create an issue on the project board and get started. And of course, these software are licensed under the MIT license, so we have, it's just available for people to use as well. Okay, any questions or comments? Rishali said cool. Okay. All right, look at Zenodo. Yeah, we'll look into that and see if that's the best solution. I'm not quite sure, but we'll see. All right. Thank you for attending. I look forward to Rishali's update tomorrow at tomorrow's meeting.
Okay, take care, everybody.
Okay, take care. Thanks.